This conference will.
Okay. Any questions, guys? Anyone? Any questions before we can get started? So the last week we were mostly looking into PowerShell. We're understanding how to create resources using PowerShell, like storage accounts, multiple storage account, multiple containers, and everything, using for each loops and all these things out here. So, any questions there before I get started with today's session? So mostly looking into PowerShell out here. We were thinking, or we started out with a very basic of PowerShell, telling write host, read host, and all these things. Then we looked into Azure PowerShell, installing modules, and then we were seeing how to, let's say, use those modules using new hyphen az resource group commands, new hyphen, let's say, az storage account commands to create resource groups, storage accounts, containers, and also upload blobs inside it. So looking at all these things out here, and we were, let's say, writing scripts, started with around 10 lines that went ahead to 120, 130 lines, and all these things out here. So any questions that I can take till here? Anyone, any questions that I can take till here? Refresher for Friday, as no recording was provided. I'll try to, let's say, see why the recording is not there. And I will send across the recording out here. I'll check with the institute and send across the recording out here. But Friday was mostly around creating multiple containers. It was creating multiple containers using the same JSON file out here. I'll try to, let's say, see if there's a recording for it, and I'll send it across. Uh, how to write arrays in parameterize. So if you want to write array in parameter, firstly you'll have to do a split of that particular array. What do I mean by that is this. Let's look at that concept real quick and let's get started with this one. And let's open this out. Uh, Partial. So param, and you have something like array. So you want to write, let's say, something like array. So I'll say it is array, and I will explicitly tell that this is an array. How do I tell that? By using something known as a typecasting. I'll say in the brackets string, open close brackets. This is the representation of an array. Now if I just say write host, this is an array, and I'll give this as $array. And if I now, let's say, go ahead and save this out as array.ps1, and if I want to execute this out right now, I'll just use that particular let's say file wherever it's saved. I think there's something called ATM file handling or something like that. Yes, this one. And if I look for this one called array.ps1 array, I can say this is test1 comma test2 comma test3 in test1 test2 any number of things. You can provide any number of things out here, but you'll have to be a bit careful with, let's say, doing this. Reason being, it's now telling this is an array, right? But if I do a for each for this, because when you're providing an array, you want to do a for each on top of it, right? If I do a write host, this is the value, and I'll say $name, and if I re-execute this once again, getting this. So how do I pass this out? Simply declare this string in the form, let's say, something like this. So this is now known as a typecasting. And in here, what I'm doing is I'm saying string, and I'm in the brackets. I'm giving, let's say, it is open and square bracket. I mean, open and let's say square brackets out here, and it is now giving me something known as an array. It's now allowing me to go ahead and let's say start typing in something called as an array in the form of comma separated values. I can go ahead and give this out in this way, and I'll get this value in the same way. And if you iterate over it, you'll get this is test one, test two, test three, and all these things out here. So if you want to, let's say, go directly into a PowerShell and create multiple resource groups and etc., this can be the first resource group, second resource group, and all these things out. And inside your for each, you can start writing new hyphen az resource group commands and all these things out here. Sorry, the status of what? Yes, in the same way, in the same thing. I mean, once you are inside the for each loop, you can do a get status, you can remove a resource group, and all these things out here. But you have to do it inside the for each loop out here. Yes, any questions here? Anyone, any questions? Again, I do remember that we recorded the Friday session, but I'll just check with, let's say, my recordings, and I'll forward across the Friday session as well. In case it is not there, I'll just try to, let's say, re-record it and send it across. Yes, any more questions here? All right. So until now, we've been dealing with PowerShell out here. We've been talking about, let's say, arrays, strings, and all these things out here. Now, the issue with PowerShell is that it's a great platform. I mean, it's a very powerful tool. You can go ahead create resources, not one, multiple resources as you saw. You can go ahead create, let's say, multiple storage accounts, multiple, let's say, resource groups, and you can also upload multiple blobs at the same time and all these things out. But it is imperative in nature. What do I mean by this? What do I mean by imperative in nature out here? Is let's understand by an example. Can I first create a storage account and then have to create, let's say, first, can I go and create a storage account and then create a resource group? Can I do this? No. Meaning,
No.
when I write my script, I need to understand what comes first, what comes next, and all these things out. Also, can I just go ahead and write a script called new hyphen az resource group? And can I say that, okay, fine, if I do a new hyphen az resource group, PowerShell will itself check whether the resource group is there or not? Can I do that? Or should I also write another command called get hyphen az resource group and then check whether the resource group is existing and then create it out?
Yeah.
What should I do?
PowerShell itself.
Meaning, will the new hyphen az resource group command also check for existence of a resource?
Yes.
Yes. We sure about that?
Mm, no, no.
No, we are writing that if loop, right?
We are
No.
writing that if loop. Exactly. We are writing an if loop. Meaning, let's say that I want to create a storage account. The very first thing that I'm doing is that I'm doing a get hyphen az storage account. I am checking whether the storage account is there or not, and then I create it. If not there, the reason being, if I don't do that, if I just go ahead create a storage account and rerun the same command, I'll get an error telling that, you know what, the storage account is already taken. I cannot go ahead and create it. PowerShell will simply throw an error for me out there. So there is a lot of, let's say, responsibility on a user, meaning on us, to go ahead and write all this logic, because you need to know. I mean, you cannot also do first create and then check. No, you cannot do that. You first need to check and then create it out. So you need to follow a proper order in PowerShell, and you need to know all that order in PowerShell out here. So very importantly, order and the, let's say, placement of commands. Let's say a command which needs to come at line number one should come at line number one only. You cannot give parameters down. You cannot, let's say, change the order and all these things, which means that you need to firstly understand, or you need to, let's say, have all that knowledge in before telling that the resource group should come first. Let's say storage account should come next, and first I need to check for the storage account, and then I need to create it and all these things out here. Second, let's understand this. Let's say I want to create 100 of, let's say 100 storage accounts out here, or 100 resource groups out here, whatever it is. What do I need to do? I either put a for loop or a for each loop or a do while, whatever it is, a looping concept out here. And I iterate over this and let's say end up creating 100 different storage accounts out here. Now the question is that will all this 100 get created at once, or will the first storage account get created first and the second storage account, then the third storage account, fourth, fifth, and all these things out here? It's one by one, meaning it's a serial creation. Meaning first it'll create the first storage account, second it'll create the second, third will create the third, so on and so forth. And for creating each and every storage account, it'll at least take 2 minutes, right? 2 to 3 minutes, I would say, to create all these storage accounts, hundreds of storage accounts out here. 200 to 300 minutes. It's actually a lot of time. And PowerShell by default gets timed out after 120 minutes. 2 hours it's the runtime, then by default it'll get timed out here when you're trying to, let's say, talk with Azure. So after 120 it's getting, let's say, timed out. So is there a way, the question, is there a way to, let's say, write PowerShell script so that it'll create all these resources parallelly? Yes. That is called as parallelism. You can implement parallel threads out here in PowerShell again. That's a very headache concept out here. Taking that parallel threads, implementing a script block and all these things. You'll have to, let's say, come from a very sound programming background not to implement all these things out here. Can you implement it? Yes, you can implement it. Is it efficient? I wouldn't say that efficient out here. It is not that efficient to go ahead and implement parallelism in PowerShell. I mean, it also consumes a lot of memory when you run parallel scripts and all these things out here. So then, is there a better approach to, let's say, go ahead and create resources better than PowerShell, easier than PowerShell, efficient than PowerShell?
ARM
Yes.
templates, bicep.
Uh, yes, ARM template, Bicep, Terraform, which all comes under a concept called declarative syntaxing. Declarative syntax. What do I mean by declarative syntaxing out here is that all the limitations that you see in PowerShell are addressed by these syntaxes out here, which is in the form of ARM templates, Azure Bicep, and there is something called Terraforms. These are the things that are out there in the market for declarative syntaxing available. For declarative syntaxing, which you don't really have to write a logic telling that if the resource group exists or if the storage account exists, then only, let's say, go ahead and if the storage account doesn't exist, only then go ahead and create it out. No if else loop, nothing. So you do not need to know the order of creation. The template takes care of it. The syntax takes care of it. B, by default, if you want to create 100 resource groups, if one resource group creation is taking 2 minutes, all the 100 will take 2 minutes only. Because by default, it is parallel in nature. Very efficient. You do not really need to know, let's say, the syntaxes. You do not really need to know. You do not, let's say, in PowerShell, what did we do? We write all this. We, let's say, go ahead write all these syntaxes out here. But when it comes to a declarative syntax, you do not really need to write a lot of things out here. You just need to know the bare minimal of it, and we are good. The very, very basic of it, and we are good. And that's a reason you do not need to know a lot of knowledge on these templates out here. You do not need to, let's say, gain a lot of knowledge as we did with PowerShell. Because when we started with PowerShell, I started with the very basic of it, like write host and all these things. I don't need to do the same thing for, let's say, something like ARM, Azure Bicep, or Terraform and all these things. So let's go into that on what exactly declarative syntaxing is. And in today's session, I would like to, let's say, start declarative syntaxing with ARM templates, Azure Resource Manager templates. One of the classic examples of declarative syntaxing. And ARM templates follow a language called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, which we have seen on how JSON is. And let's see how to write ARM templates, and let's see how to, or what are the resources to go ahead and, let's say, read about ARM templates and etc. Again, on Friday, I was just asking you to, let's say, go ahead and read on what is ARM template, right? I was telling what is ARM template. Just, let's say, click on what is ARM template out here, and you will have something called ARM template documentation telling you what are ARM templates, and it is telling you what is declarative syntaxing, reusability, and all these things out here. So let's go again. Now, in order to write the ARM template, I would need an editor. I cannot write my ARM template using PowerShell because this only supports a language called what? PowerShell. That's it. It's just a PowerShell. So if it's JSON, if it's something like this, I will need a VS Code. So I'll again open up my VS Code. Let me open up a new folder out here. Let us say that this is ARM templates class 1. And what we'll do today is that before we go and start writing an ARM template, you need to install something called as an ARM template extension in VS Code. Unlike JSON. Now in JSON, what did we do? We directly went ahead and start writing JSON because JSON is something which is inbuilt in VS Code. ARM template is not. You have to install a small software for it to go ahead and start writing, let's say, an ARM template. Just like when you buy a phone, you'll have pre-installed softwares with it. You can just go ahead and, let's say, start using them like Google Chrome and all these things out. But if you want to, let's say, use something like WhatsApp, you'll go to your Play Store or App Store and then install and download it WhatsApp, right? In the same way, there is something called as a store for VS Code. And if you go here, right, those stores or all those softwares are called extensions. Just click on extensions and just type in ARM, and it'll take a minute. And the first resource usually, and the first thing usually is Azure Resource Manager Tools, published by what? Microsoft. Click on this one. In my case, I don't have an install button because it's already installed. In your case, you'll have a small button here telling install. Just click on that install. It will take around 2 to 3 seconds. Just a very small extension will take around 2 to 3 seconds out here. Install this one. And there is also called ARM template viewer by someone called Ben Coleman. This is something that let's say, this is optional in nature. You can install it or cannot install it. I'll also tell you what, if you install this one, what will happen and all these things. But I found it very useful while writing ARM templates. You can also install this out. Once this is done, let's close this. Once this is done, just say Control plus N, Control New. And once you have your ARM template installed, it's asking you select a language. And the other day we were doing JSON, right? Today, let's start writing a language called Azure Resource Manager Templates. As and when I click this, it'll say loading ARM templates and it is ready for you. Now, in order to start writing, let's say, a script in PowerShell, we started off with, let's say, write host, read host, and all these things out, right? In order to start writing a template, I'll just say ARM, and as and when I write this, there are a lot of suggestion it loads. It's called ARM exclamation RG, and there are a couple of things out here. Now there is ARM exclamation out here. The first thing, I'll just click on this, and as and when I click on this one, it will give me a blank template. This is now called as a blank template out here. This is a blank template. So I didn't do anything. I just installed it and I went ahead and I said ARM, and the first suggestion it gave me, I load this out, and now I have a blank template out here, which can be reused, which can be, let's say, used for any creating any resource in Azure. Let's look at a couple of things in this blank template. Now, there are a couple of objects. Guys, any questions? Can you please go on mute if you do not? Okay. So there are a couple of things out here with this blank template here. It is starting with something called what? Schema. It's saying dollar schema. Again, everything is a key value pair. Key and value pair. But do you see one thing here? And what is this, guys? Array. It's an
Array.
array in JSON. Exactly. It's an array in JSON. We'll talk about why this is an array, why everything is a list and all these things out here. So there is something called schema. There is something called content version, parameters, functions, variables, resources, and then something known as outputs. We look at each and everything. The very first thing is called schema. Again, this is something which is provided to you when you say ARM and exclamation. It's provided to you by Microsoft. This is something that I don't change. This is something that I don't edit. I just use it the way it is. Why is it required? What is the significance of this one? Is that the schema is just there for validation purpose. Meaning, are you using the right syntax? Are you doing the right way? If you do not have a schema, Microsoft will not, let's say, have any option to go ahead and validate your template, and the template validation will fail. So each and every ARM template follows its syntax. So if you click on this link called schema, this will take you to, let's say, another tab, just a browser, will give you a JSON syntax out here, telling all the syntaxes that you can use in an ARM, everything that you can use in an ARM out here. So based upon this particular schema, or you can also call this as a header, based upon this particular schema or a header, Microsoft is just going to validate how your template is. Like, are you using the right syntaxes? Are you using the right commas? Are you using the right spaces? Are you using the right naming convention and etc.? This is what, let's say, your schema really means out here. Then you have something called what? Content version. Again, this is, let's say, just for revision of your templates, meaning you can have a template with a version called 1.0.0, and tomorrow later if you want to do some changes, you can do it as 2.0.0.0 and so on and so forth. Again, this is something that we don't even touch. These two things, something that we don't even, let's say, barely touch out there. Then you have something called parameters, you have functions, you have variables, you have resources, you have outputs out here. We'll talk about what parameters are, functions are, and etc. But today, what I want to do is that I want to come into the heart of the ARM template, which is the resources, which is the block called resources out here. Now, resources here will allow you to create resources like storage accounts, like virtual machines, like any resources that exists on the Azure portal apart from resource groups. You cannot directly create a resource group using an ARM template. That's the limitation that ARM template really has out here. So you might, let's say, need already, let's say, you might have to, let's say, have a resource group already in place, or you need to, let's say, use a PowerShell script to create a resource group out there. But apart from resource groups, all the other resources are pretty straightforward. You can, let's say, go and create it using an ARM template out here. You can also create a resource group using a template, but it's a little tricky. We don't generally, let's say, go ahead and create a resource group. I'll also talk about the reasons behind it. So since we know about storages, I'll start with storages because that's the only resource that we know about till now. And again, when I went ahead and when I was using PowerShell to create this particular resource called storage account, I firstly checked whether the resource group exists. Then I went ahead and, let's say, checked whether the storage account exists. And then I created the storage account out here. So if else and all those things out here. In here, I won't write any command. I won't write anything. I want to create a storage account from ARM template. So what I'll do is I'll say ARM, and as and when I do it, do you see all the suggestions are loading out here? I'll say hyphen storage. You see it is telling ARM hyphen storage to create a storage account. I'll say enter. That's it. My storage account is ready. It's as simple as this. In PowerShell, I had to write a lot of commands out here. In ARM template, what I'm doing, I'm just right. So if I again want to come from the beginning, I just started with ARM and my template started. I went inside resources, and resources is an array, meaning you can create multiple resources at the same time out here. And I'm declaring using ARM hyphen storage. I now have a very simple, or I have, let's say, a block to create a storage account. And this is now an object. Do you see it is starting with, let's say, open, let's say, bracket and closing with brackets out here. And this object has some properties, which are the properties of a storage account out here, starting with what? The name. It's asking you for the name of the storage account. And then you have something called what? Type. This is called as a resource identifier. What do I mean by a resource identifier? Is very simple. Using an ARM template, you can create anything. You can create a virtual machine. You can create any resource that is there on the Azure portal. But how does Microsoft know that you want to create a storage account? Using this block. Telling that, okay, fine, the user wants to create what? A storage account out here. And then there is something called as an API version. Again, you don't have to worry about this. This is something that is preloaded by Azure. And then you have something called what? Tags. Again, you can have multiple tags out here. Tags are very simple for identification purpose.